So we're going to jump into a conversation around retail media networks. But first, before we do that, Christine, Casey, Sabrina, why don't you all just make a quick hello and introduce yourselves to everybody here.
Awesome.
Let's start on that end.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Christine. I am a director of Programmatic at Mindshare, supporting the Discover business.
I'm Casey Harsh. I'm an SVP for commerce for the US focused. I'm currently now at Kinesso under IPG Media Brands. I also kind of part on the UM, one of the agencies, so kind of partner on both sides there.
Hello, I'm Sabrina Sirhal. I'm the Senior Director of Media at Monster Energy, and I cover both brand and retail media.
All right, well, thank you.
And by the way, I want to say thank you so much for having chairs and not stools.
Oh, yeah.
For someone who's 5'2", that's a huge...
Yeah.
Don't want the swinging legs.
No.
I have that problem, too. I mean, I understand completely. All right, so retail media networks, this is a topic of conversation that keeps coming up at every one of the MediaPost sessions. It's in all the different press, and people are talking about it. It, as well as AI, has grown substantially over the last few years. Just starting out on a broad basis, from either one of you, all three of you, how important is an RMN in your overall media strategy today versus where it was maybe last year this time? Christine, why don't you go first?
Sure. I would say it's definitely grown more and more of importance as of lately. I think compared to last year, as you asked, it wasn't so much, but I think just being on an account or a FinServe account, which is typically viewed as like a non-endemic account, a lot of retail media networks historically haven't allowed for non-endemic advertisers to run advertising with them. So for us, it's really, really exciting to be able to like tap into this new data set. So yeah, I think for us, it's really exciting to be in.
We'll go down the path.
Once we'll go down the line, and after that we won't do any more.
So I live and breathe this pretty much every single day. So I would say where I'm seeing it is the growth has been exponential, and we're seeing where I mostly had focused in the CPG space. Now we're talking with every single one of my clients. We're seeing this in kind of every category. Everyone's talking about how we should be thinking about it, how should we be using them. So I'd say that's really where we're seeing the growth, and kind of where the pop is within commerce is really just everyone thinking about it versus just being within CPG, how it's been historically.
Yeah, and I think same for us. It's incredibly important, and it has grown and is continuing to grow. I think given that we aren't a DDC product, you know, that data piece becomes so much more important, and we rely on them for that.
Yep. Casey, I want to come back to one of your points right off the bat. So compared to other types of things that CPG brands are doing, shopper marketing, in-store marketing, et cetera,
Yeah.
Does this kind of outweigh that now? Is it something that you feel is at an equal standing with a lot of type of stuff? Where is it fair compared to that?
Yeah, so I think before, there were so much silos within it. So everyone had maybe their shopper marketing team. Now maybe there was a retail media team, your national. Now it's all just being squished together. And so I think that's kind of where we're seeing it become. So I don't see it as like a one piece of it. It's now kind of spread itself and is kind of in each piece. So I would say that it is becoming such a large piece because it's putting its like little webs in every single component, because it no longer wants to just be considered part of the customer marketing side or shopper. It's now in the brand side. So I would say it's no longer just like a small component. It's everywhere.
Even from a sales perspective, are they consolidating the sales efforts to you and to the brands you work with?
Yeah, I'd say like where sometimes it was maybe sat with sales was really the leader of this. That's more coming. It's more being the media teams are leading this because, as it says, it's retail media. So there's also the argument internally we hear all the time of, is it media? Is it retail? Where does it sit? Who gets to own it? So I definitely see a lot of that all the time.
Sabrina, do you see that internally inside the brand itself? Is it clear who owns the retail media networks?
It's extremely muddy. I mean, I think we have 3 different groups that kind of play into it. We've got our e-com team, we've got shopper, and then we've got digital, which all have a role in terms of where we run, where we spend, and whatnot. And now it's gotten even more convoluted because, again, going back to what you said, there is a lot of brand media. So now it's still run by our retail team, but how do we synergize that with what we're doing on the brand side? And that's where we're trying to find the connectivity. And it's different owners and different budget holders, so it gets really muddy.
Yeah. And then, Christine, on the non-endemic, because that was something that you brought up just now, you brought it up when we talked last week. At what point did it seem like a non-endemic advertiser makes sense to come into a retail media network?
I think for us, obviously having a product that is a credit card, it just has such a natural affinity and alignment to like shopping moments. So I think thinking about it in that sense of like, well, we're not really only siloed to obviously like marketing specific products in stores or whatever, but we are there when, you know, you're at that point of purchase. So I think that's really where for us, we started to think about it and really see that opportunity.
Yeah. And is it a higher bar, a higher hurdle to get over? Because rather than getting someone to buy the product, you're actually getting them at the shopping cart level to switch the buying methodology.
Yeah. So I think it is a little bit more difficult, but I think for us, we're not really so focused on those lower funnel metrics. It's really just trying to continue to like reach them in relevant moments, whether, you know, they are like looking at bigger purchases like home appliances or things like that, and just really trying to speak to our consumers in a more relevant way to kind of drive that consideration to be ultimately like top of wallet.
Here's my favorite question about retail media networks. Is it the mob? Meaning, are you basically paying them for stuff that they already were going to be delivering to you? This is the cynical side of the nature of the question. My New Yorker comes out. But do you think you're already paying them for the stuff that they were going to deliver? Or is there an appreciable increase based on the amount of spend that you give to these folks and the outcome that you see? At a general, you don't have to give with numbers or anything, but.
I mean, going back to your first question, first of all, I'm not sure if there are any RMNs in the room, but I would say yeah.
It is the mob.
A bit of the mob.
Right.
I kind of have
protection.
a love-hate relationship because the data is so great and it's so important and it really helps us. At the same time, I think we're being pushed more and more into a corner where we have to make certain decisions and we don't have flexibility to do the things we need. I mean, I think earlier we were, basically, you heard about block lists and allow lists. We don't get to have that kind of control over the media that runs. We don't get where our media ran. But then in terms of like just in general, I feel like we're having less and less flexibility in terms of where we can spend our dollars.
Either one of you want to tackle this question?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're at like that pinnacle point of like there will have to be a change because it is like a money grab right now. And so they've been expecting 20% increases every year and no longer. Like there's only so much money in the bucket that everyone can ask for, and everyone is rolling out a retail media network and everyone's asking for that percent, and you can't get any more, and everyone thinks they can go somewhere else and find money, and it doesn't exist.
Yep.
So I think there's this pinnacle point where now is the time that brands are challenging and starting to say that you have to start to meet the standards. And I think that is where our industry has to push to say, like, no longer can it just be a money grab, and it no longer can just be that we're going to accept what you are just going to use our money for. We're going to challenge and say, like, where is this dollar actually going to do for our business? And it has to actually do something for the business, or we're going to go elsewhere. And so I think that's where we're at. Does everyone do that yet? No, and that's where I think we're seeing everyone trying to do that until we push that way, until everyone's doing that. And that's where I think a lot of the bigger companies go in and start to do that, that's where we'll see change happen. But until then, I think it's going to be a struggle, and they're going to just keep asking for money.
Yeah. And do you think, Christine, that the agencies, how much do you have control over the perception of the RMNs in the eyes of your clients? Because I know those RMNs are also going to your clients directly, and they're pitching them like Casey was just saying about, here's the percentage that I think you should be spending with us. How much control do the agencies have in that decision-making process?
I think we definitely have a lot of influence and say. I mean, with us and the clients, it's really about building that partnership and that relationship. So like having that transparent line of communication to be like, hey, like this is what we think, here's our POV. Do you agree? Do you not? I think like that's where it really starts, is just like sharing that and just being honest about, what our thoughts are as an agency, and also understanding where, the clients are coming from and what their perspective is. And ultimately at the end of the day, if that's something we want to test out and see how things go, then great. And if it works really well, then we'll continue with it. And if not, then we'll just, pivot a little bit and try something else.
Yeah. And just to double down on that question too, when you put together the testing strategies for the RMNs, 2 questions about it. How long do you give them to be able to prove the ROI that they're going to be able to deliver? And are those metrics that they're held to, are they different than other platforms that you typically would be spending money with?
Yeah, I think given that for us, this is like a newer space, we are going to be more patient around like sharing that prove out of ROI. I think a lot of times with RMNs, they all have like their different methodologies too of like how they consider as ROAS. But again, given that we're a little bit removed from the RMNs of like, we're not actually like products that are being sold in that business, it's a little bit difficult to like or just different for us to like navigate. But I think we're looking at, you know, points of consideration, like how does this really like drive, you know, site visits, or like incremental reach is going to be more what we're specifically focused on. And we've really seen that success and positive success so far. So I think again, like, you know, for us, it's not necessarily about that. Like I used to work on CPG clients, so like we can see that like more effort, like quicker of like, okay, is this actually driving value? Is it driving ROAS? For us, being within the FinServe vertical, it's more about having a little bit more patience and kind of seeing that through. So yeah, so I think that is a big thing. And then sorry, I forgot your second question.
Just are they held to different metrics than some of the other platforms you typically work with?
Yeah, for us, yeah. So I think like we're gonna obviously like pair it with, you know, our other tactics that we use, and we kind of use that as our like unified like idea of measurement. So like example of like, is it driving consideration via like our measurement? So that's how we're like holding or understanding like how their value is. So I wouldn't necessarily say like we're holding them to a completely different level, but we are trying to like, you know, make sure that it's unified and we're kind of speaking a little bit of the same language there.
What about on the side of the brand? Do you agree with all that? Is it the same thing that you're looking at?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. You know, you'd asked about, are these dollars or are these customers that we would have gotten anyway? And I think it's hard to answer that. And we want to look at incrementality testing and things like that. But some of these RMNs offer that to us, but then it's just looking at that one platform, not looking across multiple, and where is that overlap, and are these really net new people? And then another piece of it is too, again, I feel like because they're asking for, you know, continued growth and more money, they're starting to look at the brand side and like, how can we pull dollars from the brand side over to retail? Mm-hmm. And some of it is brand, because it's like we're looking at, you know, streaming TV and online video and even audio that we can run there. But then the sets of measurements are different across both. So, you know, on the retail side, we're looking at ROAS and new to brand and even new to category and things like that. Whereas on the brand side, it's a different set of metrics. They're looking at, you know, completion rates and, you know, basically brand lift and things like that. So I think they're, you know, as we're kind of bringing, you know, we're doing more brand on the retail side, I think we're trying to relook at what are the right metrics and, you know, depending on the placements and whatnot. And then, like I said, incrementality testing as well. And
you have a brand that does a lot of cool and interesting things. Do you get the same flexibility from a creative perspective working with the RMNs as you would with, you know, outdoor or working with even in-store?
We do for the most part. I think, though, that there is such a heavy lift on the amount of content we need. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the limitation. It's just, you know, again, because we're running everything from streaming TV, online video, down to like an on-site placement, there's so many placements we need to cover within one buy on the retail side that it becomes, where we have some flexibility, it just becomes like more of a lift for a creative team to try to produce all that content for us.
And Casey, I want to come back to something you said. You alluded to, without obviously with any specifics, but you had mentioned that the money for retail media networks, it has to come from somewhere. It's coming from some other channel that was previously had that money. Where typically is it coming from right now?
Yeah, I think depending, again, we're going to start to go into brands, because again, that's where they're starting to go like, ooh, there's money there. There's a lot of money there. Well, a lot of it was we're looking at is within those channels. So like where that channel mix has already been is within like kind of our programmatic display. Does it make sense to start to tap into the Walmart DSP and leverage that? But what we start to think about is really, they should be held to the same standard if we were buying direct, like with the trade desk and buying in that way. Now we know that there might be a CPM data fee that we're paying to Walmart, and there might be benefits because it's going to the JBPs and different things that we also get on that side. But we're looking at the MMMs, we're looking at the results in that way, so we're able to really start to say, is it this like the juice worth the squeeze at the end of the day? Is it worth it to pay a little bit extra up front and we're gonna get more on the back end and get returns? But I'd say like we're not like shifting our channel strategies within brands to cater to a retailer, or that is not the goal. And I wouldn't say we're really shifting a lot of that. I think within CPGs, you definitely see a lot more search dollars being focused on retail than maybe in Google before and things like that, just because that's where consumer behavior is in a lot of cases. But I'd say for the most part, really no like shifts in channels, because that strategically should be based on what the brand and the audience are. It might just be what data, and we think about it really is they're just data partners at the end of the day, especially from a brand lens, that we should be just using in a data way.
Yeah. Well, they're data partners, and they also give you a contextual environment that may hopefully be more relevant to finding somebody who is lower in that funnel, in that consideration set. So is there any impact from spending on the RMNs that you see has like a halo effect on the other channels where you spend dollars? Are you getting in front of a consideration within the consideration set of the consumer more adeptly, and therefore you're seeing search increase? You're seeing other things like in-store sales increase. Is there any other benefit than just the sheer volume of increases that you see from new customer acquisition from an RMN? Anybody?
I feel like right now it's so disjointed in how like the plans are being built and the tech being so separate. It's been harder to connect and see how things are. You might say like directionally we've seen this, but because everyone's planning so separately, doing things separately, it's been harder to like kind of track down and say like, was this really because of like this change? I think that's where we're all trying to get to, and is that consolidation of where data is, management of that. So I think there hasn't been a prove out yet to say like this is really like why. But I think that's where everyone's trying to get to, is to how we can start to look at, and that's where kind of my focus has been really about planning holistically and trying to build holistic ways so that we're not actually planning brand and the like customer marketing efforts separately, but actually thinking about them together, so that you can actually start to think about, well, how did we reach them at the, I know we hate to talk about the funnel because does it really exist?
Been there for a long time.
It's easier to explain something that's more the national brand side, talking at the top, that did we pull it through and get them then at that specific retailer, and did that impact it at the end of the day? The messy middle of who does what at the middle spot, but I think that's where the goal is to try to see, but I don't think anyone's truly been able to prove it out. And that's where I think everyone's confused of how much do you spend with a retail media network, because they haven't proved it out yet.
Yeah.
I think we're very much in the same place in terms of it is really muddy. And I think aside from, what you just shared, it's also how many people, we talk about like new to brand and whatnot, which are we getting, our current consumer to buy more? Are we bringing new people in? Are we exposing people that weren't familiar with the brand? And I think those are the things that we want to dig into, just because, to better understand like what levers are actually working and how everything's threading through from, top of funnel to the bottom. And I think, again, we're re-looking at our measurement to be able to really dig into that a bit better.
I have one more question, and I think at that point we'll open up for a couple of questions. But before I give you this last question, I want to tell you that these three folks here, I haven't actually asked any of the questions we prepped for. So they're doing a fantastic job of just actually going with it, which is the exact kind of conversation we want. So before we get to any of these last questions, just give them a round of applause. All right. So there was one question that we did kind of talk about when we did our prep call, which I'm going to combine it with two other ones, which is that if you have an RMN in front of you right now, let's just say there's 20 of them in the room and there's 50 more looking online right now, what do you want them to come to you with? Like, what do you wish they were bringing to you right now, whether from a performance and analytics perspective or from a creative and an opportunity perspective? What do you wish they were bringing to you right now?
I mean, from my perspective, I feel like they're bringing a lot already. And it's, for me, it's, again, the measurement piece of it that's really important. And I think some partners are further along than others in terms of really explaining who's converting, the benefits, like what they're providing. And again, going back to incrementality, are these net new people, or are they people we would have gotten anyway through our brand efforts? And I think some of them, again, are better at helping us understand those nuances than others. You know, some are still more up and coming. So I think we get a lot from them. At least, you know, it's like there are always opportunities being offered up. It's almost too much in some cases, where it's like, okay, you know, we're trying to figure out how all the pieces fit together. So I would just say, like, you know, measurement's a big piece, and in terms of you know, everything else, in terms of the tactics, and, you know, I want to understand, like, the audiences they're bringing to us, like performance, all that stuff. So that for me, it's like, it's really measurement.
I think for me, it's really been the transparency. That, again, they have been the walled gardens. They're kind of in their black boxes, and I think that's,
I imagine that's a big one.
yeah, that's a big one for everyone. Is more the transparency, and I think them understanding that the more they can be transparent is really the unlock to, again, because brands are not going to not spend with them. Like, there is a connection to them being a media partner, but they also are a customer, a retailer that CPGs and brands are going to spend with them. They have to spend with them. It's part of the kind of the sales side of it. So I think for them to realize their growth and their potential, it's really about transparency to be able to be the media growth side of it. And that's where I think that's like the biggest part, is just them working to be that partner there, because they're kind of their worst enemy right now. So I think that's like the biggest part that we're really
showing that if they get incremental spend from you, it has a positive incremental growth opportunity as well.
Yeah, exactly, and just really proving that out, and being, again, we talked about, like, there's viewability standards, different things that everyone's like trying to get right now. Again, like even some of the block list, things like that. Some of them are scared to let us tag, and in the simplest form, just scared to even put a tag on to prove out even offsite media, like things that are, and they're like, can't put a tag on it, and we're like, what does this even mean you're doing then? Like, what are you even buying for us? So I think that's where we're like, you just got to be transparent with us, and that's the opportunity. So.
Yeah, I would say I agree with both Casey and Sabrina on that. I think for us too, it's really, again, like, this is such a newer space for us. So like being open and kind of being, and we like working with them just as we continue to develop and sophisticate our audience strategy. So just like keeping our eyes wide open, making sure that, you know, we're getting as much as we can out of them, but also, as with any other like media partner, they're really sophisticated in their own way. So I think for me, it's real for us kind of bringing the two answers together is just kind of standardizing everything. But yeah, I think they're doing a lot, and it's really exciting. So yeah, just hopefully we can have, you know, as we continue to evolve, just more of like a same language type of thing.
Yep. Right. Any questions from the audience that want to bring up here? Yes, you got one down here in the front. Mike's working its way to you.
Hi, I'm Manny. I'm with Dentsu. Questions for Casey. I'm wondering how you, well, one, if you've observed this and how you handle it. Deals being struck outside of a media context. You mentioned the sales teams. There's partnerships teams with a retailer and the client. There's a much bigger relationship, and a lot of times these things happen outside of the line of sight of the agency and your operations. How do you navigate when you find out about those things later and then have to kind of try and pay it off and extract value from that?
Yeah, I think, again, every client relationship with agencies are different, and how they're working through that. So from an agency perspective, we try to say, like, hey, we want to bring value, and we want to be part of that conversation, because the media component of these, like, of those conversations is a big deal at the end of the day. So if you sign us up and you don't push for anything, you don't push for these things, and we've kind of contracted into what we've gotten. So we try to push to be part of that. Now, it may not be us in the room. It may us just pushing and sharing, like, hey, these are the standards we should be pushing for and wanting, because I think that's at least the most important thing we can do, is just support them and get them the education for sales teams to understand, like, don't just sign on the dotted line and accept that the retailer is going to be your partner. So I think that's really one of the bigger things that we try to do, is just make sure that they're educated. So the other day I sat with, like, a customer marketing team and talked about reach and frequency. And that was, like, probably the first time a lot of the teams ever even heard about reach and frequency, because it was just media standards, right? So, hey, because that's not where sales teams are really caring about, right? So it's, I think sometimes just going into the best practices and things like that maybe those organizations hadn't heard about, but retailers are combining retail and media, and you kind of have to make sure everyone that knows the understanding of that. So
We have another question here. Hey everyone, Nolan Johnson from Grocery TV. So we're a company that does in-store video, and so this kind of quagmire that you all have with how do you deal with like RMNs versus brand media versus where does it live in this bucket of media and silos that we have built up. I'm very curious to get your perspective on if you have frameworks when dealing with like is a media buy more of a brand as opposed to like an RMN or network like shopper buy, or what that looks like from a commerce perspective. Because I know that there's this like really hard challenge right now that you all mentioned, like is this a brand buy, is this more of a commerce buy, and how that works internally with your teams. I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
I mean, I could jump in.
That one's kind of made for you. Go ahead.
I was like, I feel like from a brand side, yeah.
I mean, the honest answer, it's a bit of a muddy area because I think it's something that both sides want to do, and then I think a lot of times it just depends on who has budget to cover it. And it's like, you know, sometimes it's like, oh, that sounds great, have retail do it, and then retail will be like, oh yeah, we don't have the budget, have brand do it. So so sometimes it's really about, you know, because it kind of can cross both, but I think what we try to also look at is, you know, going back to measurement again, I feel like I keep talking about that, but basically what metrics are we looking at and where does it better fit? So, you know, on the sales side, they're really looking for like, are we delivering sales, ROAS, things like that. So if we're able to showcase that that's something that we can deliver, then we you know, we're able to make a case for it on the retail side. And if we're not, then we try to push it to the brand side.
We have time for one more question.
Lisa, I have one more back here.
Okay, yes, we have time for 2 more questions.
There we go.
Hi, Bill Harmon from Quidio. So you mentioned that there's a blend of where the budgets come from, whether it is from the shopper budget, from the retail budget, from the programmatic budget. We also, you know, have different platforms, right? We have on retail site, we can take the audiences off-site, and then we can do PMPs as well and things like that. How often are your teams coming together for holistic planning to be able to best allocate budgets across solutions like that, right? So how often do the discussions of where should we put this budget, where is it best used happen, or are they mostly operating in silos?
I don't know. So from like the agency side and what we're pushing for. So from my perspective and what my team does is we actually I'm more agnostic from a channel, and I am actually looking strategically across from all perspectives. So I lead from both online and offline. So I'm looking channel perspective, both in store, retail media, pretty much everything. And then I also sit with my counterparts that lead from the brand perspective as well. And I have performance teams, so programmatic, social. We all sit together and try to plan holistically. Again, there's a lot of players, hands in the cookie jar, political, like it can get challenging. But the goal, I think, and where everyone's trying to get to is we all think about it's the consumer, it's focusing on that who we're trying to talk to, and it's all the same person. So us trying to think about it is not as a channel, but really where we're trying to meet them and how do we get there, and what's like the right data, and how do we really meet them. So I think that's how we approach it from an agency perspective, is trying to break down the silo and think about it holistically, versus and trying to meet in different points versus having it trying to assign different roles and say like this is where that should live versus that, because at the end of the day it's too muddy to try to do that.
Last question.
Hi everybody, Constantine from Fetch. Fetch is a retail agnostic media platform, so we have visibility into like a full consumer spend pattern and stuff like that. We're actually working with RMNs on like supplementing the JBPs that they bring to market and having that kind of more holistic visibility. And when you talk about incrementality for on-site activity, it makes a lot of sense of, you know, how do you like verify that this is like a new behavior? But you mentioned, Casey, kind of when you go into the brand world and then going down the funnel to an individual retailer, it's a much bigger leap in the consumer journey, right? Like they're kind of not in that space. So can you talk a bit about off-site and using retail data and how you're thinking about KPI setting? Again, like kind of like going between these things, right? You're explaining what reach and frequency is to a sales team. Like they're setting goals. Like, can you just explain like what the KPI process looks like?
Yeah, I think for where we've had with different clients is when we are, it's again based on the budget where that's coming from. is where somewhat decides the KPIs when we're going to an off-site perspective. So if the goal is from maybe a brand side, their goal and KPI measurement is really about driving results for the brand. So they may not be specific to a singular retailer. So we're thinking about ROI overall. So could a Walmart's data versus leveraging like Fetch's data starting to be head-to-head in that perspective and say, who's going to drive overarching like the results that's going to like drive there? And a lot of times that goes into more of an MMM. So a lot of times brands are looking at holistic MMMs, they're trying to go there versus saying, I'm going to go look at Walmart's closed loop reporting, because at the end of the day, that's just looking at one siloed piece. And I think a lot of times brands are going, that no longer is what I want to look at, because you're just looking at one piece of the pie. So I'd say that's probably where everyone's starting to look at more holistic picture versus siloed, versus when you're doing like customer or like those like commerce budgets, that's when they might start looking at the like closed loop retail media measurement. I don't know if that's anywhere else you see that, Sabrina.
No, I think you're spot on.
Okay.
So I think for the panel, the big takeaway is that the retail media networks are a necessary part of the ecosystem now. They're not going to go anywhere, but they do seem to need a little bit more self-confidence when they come to basically work together and figure out what's the standard for this side of the business. Because whether it's agency or it's a brand, they need to be able to fit into the overall scheme of how you all operate, whether it's by the agencies and their silos individually or the individual groups inside the brand. They have to know how to work across all those different groups and be a little more cognizant of the challenges they create by not being aware of that. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
All right. Well, give them a round of applause. They did a fantastic job. Thank you for allowing me to not use any of the questions we prepped.